Welcome to Science, Health, and Healing. We are here with Dr. Majid Ali, and our conversation this evening is going to be about living well with COVID-19, with ancestral pathways of living for acute and chronic illnesses during COVID-19 pandemic, forthcoming COVID epidemics caused by the COVID cousin viruses and the congeries of chronic, persistent, progressive COVID infections and diseases, the COVID long that's been determined and identified by the government and named by the government, and of course the solutions, more importantly, from our ancestors. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for being here and talking to us about this. I have some interesting statistics from the recent Pathways publication.
It's always a true, authentic pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. I understand that they have one of the statistics which is very alarming, and I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about this, but in Bangladesh, it's the home to 38 million child brides, including currently married girls, along with women who were first married in childhood. And of these 13 million, those that are married before the age of 15, 57% of the young women in Bangladesh were married before their 18th birthday. And on top of that, nearly 5 to 10 child brides gave birth before age 18, and 8 in 10 gave birth before the age of 20. Your thoughts?
Mark, I don't know what prompted you to choose those sentences to begin this problem. But to me, it is an amazing coincidence, or my look into your farsightedness. You went straight to the center of the issue, living well with COVID-19. In August of 2020, I published a long paper in the journal Nature. And the title of that was Living Well with COVID-19. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that Nature accepted this and published that. And the word vaccine was not in that article. And that surprised me that the Nature editorial board is really the top of whatever comes in matters of editorial boards. That they noticed that this guy dares to write an article and send it to us for publication. And the title of this is Living Well with COVID-19. And he doesn't use the word vaccine there. He doesn't use the word mask there. I didn't realize it was happening. It must have been early hours of the morning, and I was up probably all by myself in our Hackensack office, New Jersey, writing on this. When I read that about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was astonished that I would have used that language. The real title was the demo, vision, and model of living well with COVID-19.
And just to clarify, the GEO model is the gut insulin and oxygen model that you have been publishing.
That's right. And the point of that is that we want to move forward to, Mark, the very origins of the issues of health and healing are all bioenergetic. There were no chemicals around in the days of Greece, for example, classical Greek, or Rome, or the earlier Hindu days, Indian days, or Jain medicine, which is credited to be the oldest systematized, organized system of treating disease. So when you go there, you are struck with this, that they were all occupied, and amazingly rightfully, when we look now into 2021 back, what world were they living in? Their whole focus was on physics of health. There was no focus on chemistry of disease there. How could they? Because at that time, the synthetic chemistry had even not been tried, let alone perfected. So you will have drug for every disease. You coin the names of diseases, and then come up with the drugs. So your viewers know that I started my work out as a surgical pathologist. And I directed Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, the laboratory, for about 27 years. Everything that has to do with perks of being a pathologist is related to microscope. And writing this piece, it occurred to me, I could have never conceived back in 1974, when I was invited to chair this department, large department of pathology and laboratories, that a time would come that I would look back. What I'm going to say would be considered very contentious, but I'm going to say it. To say that the cumulative benefits of antibiotics to date, now the cumulative downside is that it now exceeds the cumulative benefits. I know that people would jump at it. They would say, how can you make an argument against antibiotics for, let's say, pneumococcal pneumonia in a child, or Staph aureus infection or abscess in a 4-year-old autistic boy? But then they will have to look deeper into what I'm saying. Microscope does not allow to clearly observe the antecedent elements which could triggered the seeding process of the disease. And then the disease comes in, and as it gets manifested. And then people who suffer it, they talk about loss of, let's say, taste and a smell, as it happened in COVID-19.
Right.
I think the main point there is, this is an enormous leap that you go into the vision of physics of health. It's interesting. Theoretical physicists exist. Many moons after that article was published in Nature, I started thinking about this. The classical theoretical physics is that they imagine, or a vision comes, and they publish it. Now they know that the world of physics are going to look at their publication and they say, this is really guesswork, he has no evidence. They don't care. Now they will set up the experiments to prove them wrong. The theoretical physicists are always proven wrong by the people who set up their own experiments, not because they have the love for that investigation of that question. It is just an idea, who is this guy who is getting published in journals of physics, and he's all talking about theoretical things. Most of them get shut down within a year or two. The singular exception to this day, to my knowledge, is Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. Because more people have set up experiments to prove him wrong, and nobody to this day has conclusively proved his theoretical physics down.
That's amazing.
To me, there is a very important lesson here for physicians or for other people who basically are interested in matters of health and healing, which is that a true investigator, a true searcher, if you take his imagination away from him, he's nothing. Mm-hmm. It is the flight of imagination. It is the freedom to imagine things which are different. That starts the process of theoretical physics. Then comes in the experimental designs, and then the data collection, and then towards the end, then you have the product for it, which may have clinical applications. Now, when I read my own article, that was very well referenced, because I had been writing a large number of commentaries in journal Nature, starting with 2015 to probably 2020 or so. I was reading Nature regularly, and I was writing almost exclusively for Nature, okay? Because those were the subjects. It was that approach that we want you to be free to imagine. And at that time, it occurred to me that the time is right that we seriously consider this issue. Our world has been reduced to a state of despair for children, for mothers of those children, for teachers, for the restaurateurs. You know, they can't find the help. The customers are not there, etc. And this is all over the world. Delta, they call it variants. I think we should call them the cousin Delta. When cousin Delta was first discovered in India, it lit up the whole country. And so Dr. Sabita of our staff, she's from India, and she went there at that time to visit her parents. She said, you know, there is no place where you can bury people because there are fireworks. These are the funerary fires. Everywhere you go. And then a few days later, it jumps, cousin Delta jumps from India and comes to Britain. And Boris Johnson, I think that's his name, the Prime Minister of Britain these days, he had declared that the British society is closed because we are going to control coronavirus. And he had to eat his words, and he gave the date ahead of time. Probably it was June of something, like June 20, early days of June. And then when cousin Delta flew from Bombay, India, to London, the British Prime Minister had to postpone that. They were going to close the society, as they could say it. They had to keep up there, because literally 3,000 hospitalization the first day, 6,000 the second day. Amazingly, 4 days later, it was 18,000. When it reached 18,000, the Prime Minister Boris did not have any option. He had to close the whole society. And then there were some people in Chicago area, northeastern, and one senior staff member mentioned it to the other, and he said that this surge that we are seeing in Chicago of COVID-19, might it have anything to do with Delta variant, they were calling it that at that time? He said, and his junior assistant said, I will look into it. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, he ran into it in the hospital corridors, and he said, oh, what was the follow-up on that? They hadn't even tried to get, at that time, obtain the sample from London and then start the using of these sequencers to try to find out what is it. Is it the same virus that flew from India 3 days earlier, and now it goes and it closes up with London society, and then it crosses the Atlantic Ocean, it comes to New York, and within 3 days it was in the western states and in the middle state, and then it started all over. The point that I'm trying to make there is, it's too late for us to go on television and say that people who were taking dialysis, their death rate has gone up 5 times as much. Or for them to say, well, most of those people who have died with COVID-19 are the people who were obese, that's too much insulin, or they were diabetic, that's too much insulin for a long period of time before you get to insulin deficiency, and then asthma. Well, remember we started with word G for gut,
right,
and I for insulin and O for oxygen.
right.
But let me present to your viewer a different dimension of this. In my mind, there was this issue of some virologists who are culturing clinical specimens to see what they can grow. And then there is a hope that after it grows, it looks like granular seeds of something, these viral colonies. And then they bring in the sequencer, and they try to sequence it, and then they will try to nomenclature things. Somebody someplace is going to say, right, we are going to call it SARS-1 or SARS-2 or COVID-19 or COVID-17 or etc. It occurred to me that what might have been the case of some of our ancestors who lived, let's say, 2,000 years ago. They lived someplace in the plains of Middle America.
They have something to teach us, I think.
Yes. The point is they were the true observers. They were the true original clinical ecologists. They were the true original people who imagined that our world may be deficient in water someday if the water keeps getting wasted the way we are. So they started making this voice, and they had this idea in one Eskimo language. There is a word nade, and I didn't know, so I looked up the dictionary. They said it refers to they were going in the opposite. 4,000 years before Einstein came up with this relativity theory and gravity thing. They were talking about the opposite of that. And these Nade people were saying, no. This water and the ice and the trees and the mountains and the flatlands and the grains, no, this is one continuous whole. That was the beginning of the whole idea of ecology. That we may look that this is a bunch of trees, but no, it's an ecological system of trees.
It's a continuum.
And the birds that live there,
yep,
and the animals who gather together under the shade of that, etc. I remember that day, I said, see, this is the old saying that whenever you think you have come up to something really valuable, brand new, you never heard about it, but then you go to the history and they knew it. They knew it. They had names for it. Now, let's imagine it's 1,000 years ago. We are in savannas of Georgia or South Carolina or someplace. And we see these people, they're just looking at the trees and the barks and the flowers and the bird branches. And sometimes they pull something and they crush it between 2 stones. What was in their mind? How did it work? You see, they had the great advantage that they saw oneness in everything. Our major problem is Congress cannot deal with the Senate, and Senate cannot deal with Congress, and Democrats and Republicans, they would rather the other party disappear from this area. They were exactly opposite of this, and to think that the time reference of that, and at that time they were very conscious. I don't know, I have never read, maybe you have, that there were some societies among the indigenous Americans or the Eskimos of Russia or Canada who had this idea that 51%, as you just read, of our girls should be child brides. And then, of course, they started having children and children and children.
It doesn't
now
help
look at Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Okay? Now that's also another interesting aspect of this. The National Organization of Promoting Reproductive Health in Women, it was spearheaded in Bangladesh. That's why they have the data, and that data is available. And now, to our horror, now we recognize these these girl brides, teenager brides, what about their rights? When they were being accepted into marriage, and then started out having babies at age 15 or 18.
Right.
What were their rights, and how were they? Who was planning for them? And now we are angry that Delta spread so fast in India. Why? Where in the whole world could Delta go to get his anger out better than India with better results? And Delta was interested in mitigating his own anger, dissipating his own, annoyance. And so he looked at the world and he said, where do I go? Those Indians, they seem to have the least oxygen in their tissues and cells. And they are very, very acidic. They're going to be very delicious to lunch on.
Right.
Okay? So it went there. It went probably there on somebody's, on the body of somebody, clothes or something in a plane. But then it showed its color. And then it was not satisfied. He said, I should go back to Britain where I came from, and let's take this gift there. Let's try to see it through the lives of some middle-aged or older people who lived 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. There were no plane flights. All they had was what? Curiosity. Next to curiosity, they had the strongest investigative tool, and that was imagination. And they were not limited that the grant money that we are getting, it doesn't include imagination. In fact, grant money grantors usually, they don't like imagination. They just want the T's to be crossed over and I's to be dotted. They want the numbers that again will be published.
Right.
They have their own objectives, okay? Because their masters are interested in coming up with chemical solutions to all the problems. But the ancestors that I like to call them as a generic thing, people who preceded us,
Right.
people who were to observe the relationships of the liver, let's say river and the fish in it, and the salmon in the river and the bears which needed to also have breakfast or lunch or something like that. I think they were true observers. They had another great advantage.
And they weren't inhibited by so many things that we're inhibited by today, and the imagination was much more freely.
Absolutely. They were the true scientists. I try to define who a scientist is in my Oxygen and Aging book. It seemed to me a true scientist is an individual with a singular allegiance. His only allegiance is to the truth in what he observes. A true scientist is not interested in winning over the people who have a different point of view. He just imagined it, he tested it, and he put it out for other people to shoot it down. And when they can't shoot it down, embarrassed, they come back to him and they said, okay, we know that you published this 25 years ago. The tragedy of COVID-19 is that people who have been coming to the radio and the television, they were always interested where to wear masks.
Right, statistics and things like that.
And when to have the vaccination and when to have the second dose, and then they are starting thinking about the boosters. This mask changing and the boostering is going to go on for a very long time. And the solution when it comes to, it will come to what I call our ancestral thinking, our ancestors living. They did not philosophize so much by that. They practiced holism. They practiced togetherness. They practiced oneness. Right. For us, this is a very interesting notion, but it is counterproductive to our research, because in research, we want the body of data. We want big data. Right. Those original people, they were not into big data. They were interested in the observation has to be authentic.
So, do you think that the COVID-19 will abolish humankind?
Yes, it is capable of it, except if we woke up and we started studying what did our ancestors do. Because remember, there is no historical record that COVID-19 came and it abolished humankind. So the question is, why were they not abolished by COVID-19? We are not very troubled by, we are humbled and troubled by this question. Would COVID-19 abolish? Well, COVID-19 would not be the first pathogen to abolish a society. It has been done, it has happened many times. It used to happen with even smallpox in Europe relatively recently. Okay.
Or the question might even be, will our vaccines and masks and pronouncements of our medical predictors and COVID-19 whatnot maybe undo mankind instead, as opposed to just the
I think
virus
that is
itself?
A more valid question. How did those people get spared from COVID-19s of their era? Because their water was clean, because their food was good, they were growing it, they understood their food, they understood their animals, and they understood the social context, okay? Because they were not just theoretically, to them it was not poetry, okay? We may be carried away and we might want to put their images into our poetry. Well, that's a format of expression, so we can't fault that, okay? But they are telling us that we did it and we succeeded. You come 5,000 years later and with your mask and with your, your vaccines and with your
technology,
ivermectins and all with your drugs and, you're talking about this. You are very frustrated because it doesn't work. Why don't you look at our record, because it did work. Right. When we were observing, when we were true to ourselves. I think there is a deep, Mark, I think what we call primitive people were far more advanced than us. I think they have very strong allegiance to their associations. For example, I read a lot about the ancient literature. I don't come across an epidemic of depression and anxiety in teenagers, as it is happening here, because here, unfortunately, there is fentanyl with it, there is codeine with it, okay? It's not only the environment created by COVID-19, it has been the damage which has been done before, and it is deeply embedded in the matrix of the soil we live on. So now, at this time, shouldn't we ask a question, a serious, authentic research to separate how many of these lost businesses and lost lives are because of our insistence that we know only chemistry of disease and that's what we are going to do, and you have your other ideas of observing animals and the roosters, for example, etc. I think that answer this question. What kind of a courage would it have taken for a tribal leader of indigenous American people here what kind of a courage would it have taken for him to start thinking about dividing the land, dividing the turf, dividing the trees, dividing the little girls, okay? So their mind was into dividing and numbers. Because I guess when you divide, you do increase the numbers.
Yeah.
But you increase the numbers without reflecting on what are the consequences of increasing these numbers. Bangladesh people found out that when you marry your brides, girl brides, they start having babies at age of 13, age of 14, age of 15, 18, and then there is massive explosion of population.
Well, I mean, back then I'm sure that they had, thousands of years ago, similar traditions and similar, cultural values back then. But how did our ancestors manage to thrive and survive through this thing, through the millennia since the beginning of mankind? I mean, how is that? How did we get to this point and survive? And now we have this thing called COVID-19 or whatever you want to call it. Now it's going to be COVID and the Delta. Why is it that we are in this position now?
The available literature of classical Greek times actually does give us some clue. Similarly, the classical in India, Ramayana, epics, they really, if you go there, this idea, I want to prove to gods that they are not the final controllers of life, okay? No, he was told that everyone has to die. And he said, Gilgamesh, okay? Gilgamesh said, no, I want to prove God's wrong. See, there is that sense that I don't want anyone else to circumscribe me, okay? To draw circles around me and say these are the circles of proprietary, properness. You can't go out of this. How do you explain this, the death of a young bride, the death of her husband to him? That we kept on arguing about it and arguing about it and arguing about it, and none of us has had the courage to just try something. I think it will be, what I'm trying to do in this new book on COVID-19, Living Well with COVID-19, is to marshal as much narratives from our past, people who are ahead of us. Those are basically our, ancestors.
Well, how did your ancestors survive COVID?
Because they grew their own food, because they pulled the water for, drinking water for themselves and their cattle themselves.
Because SARS existed back, they must have existed back
Exactly
then as
right.
well.
So the issue was not on this side of the equation, the issue was on the other side. As we are finding the hard way in India and in Europe and in America and Canada, we are finding it the hard way that when they succeeded because of protecting the human flesh, the human cells, and the human organs from the adverse environments of toxic foods and toxic thoughts and toxic, the trio of toxicities, food, environment, and thoughts. I think that the COVID-19 would be remembered for the World Health Organization when they announced that they expected that the mortality of COVID-19 virus could be 30 to 33 times as much as the seasonal flu. They were dead wrong. And just one person from Iceland proved them wrong, because he took Iceland, his whole country. He was a middle-level manager of their health plan. Okay, he heard this radio cast from WHO, And he said, they're talking about 3.4%. Well, 3%, 3.4% of what? They had to let us know what the whole is. Before you can talk about 3.4% of the whole, you have to know the whole. So he said, look at his courage and look at his simpleness. He said, no, WHO could not have been right. For them to be right, they have to go and interview every child, every man, every woman, every elderly person in the whole entire world. Only then they could say it's 3.4% of the people. Otherwise, their numbers are not real. So he came up with this idea, let us do, you know, we are poor people, we cannot afford all these things. We will try to, one thing he's smart he did is, he contacted president of Amgen. Amgen at that time, American company Amgen, they had the patent, they had the antibodies to make the, you know, the vaccine and the testing material, the PCR, the chain reaction, okay? So they were making the reagent in America. So he called him directly, he said that, you know, I've been thinking about something which would be valuable for this pandemic. So he said, what's on your mind? I said, if we could have an easy-to-do test, effective test, then we could do the tracking. So he told his assistant, he says, whoever he is, give him whatever he wants. Okay? The story of the guy on the other side, Uruguay, that's even more inspiring. He's not a doctor, he was a postdoc at Pasteur Institute in Paris for some time. And his friends were all, you know, lifeguards on beaches. And then he said, look guys, we are not going to survive as people. We have to make our own test. So he had some experience, I think they gave him some experience at Pasteur Institute in Paris. So he did that. At this stage in my life, I think the most precious thing for all of us, when we consider questions like this, with COVID-19, abolishing humankind, that would not be the first time a pathogen nearly abolished the humankind.
Because, I mean, there are epidemics and pandemics worldwide in the history of this. Who knows what they all were? We really don't know. But how did we deal with that back then? How did they deal with it? Well, how did we? And it's just amazing that I find that we're making such a show out of this.
That's right.
And it's. I mean, I don't understand it. And I think most people don't understand what's going on here. And you seem to have enlightened us on this in a little bit. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was what we've kind of been talking about already, but the whole idea of the pathways of living. What is the pathways of living?
Pathways of living.
The ancestral pathways of living.
If you give me 2 minutes, your viewers might, you know...
You'll have more than 2 minutes.
Your viewers might like to hear this. I published a series of articles online, and the series title was Our Shared African Grandmothers. So anybody knows that I was not born in Africa any place. So in my imagination, I had this tribe of nomadic people someplace in Africa. And there, the men were out there, you know, hunting for food. And the women were going into the forests, trying to look for berries and some, you know, bark and roots. So 5 or 6 of those grandmothers were there, and the others were out. And they looked at one of their teenagers, and she looked in pain. So they looked at each other, and they looked at her, And they came to this consensus that she probably is having that time when we get red between our thighs. So she saw that, and she noticed that her old other grandmothers of the tribe, they were looking at her. And with silent eyes, they were pleading, she's in pain. So if you know something it can be done, do it. What are you thinking about? So after a while, everybody was happy when she shot into the bush and disappeared. So now they were thinking, she has been very good in the past, so maybe she's going to do it this time too. She will deliver it. So after a while, she comes out of the bush and she has something in her hands, something from bark, something from leaves, something from, the roots, probably crushed between two pieces of stone, and some of this was smeared on her hands. So they were all very happy to see her. They celebrated by clapping. And the teenager who was in pain smiled too. So that was great. And so she gave her portion that she had built, gotten from the forest to her. And sure enough, the teenager started, smiling. She grinned. Everybody was happy. The healer had delivered. And that teenager started openly laughing. And then something happened that everybody was puzzled again in the tribe, and they started looking at each other. The doctor, grandmother, had shot back into the bush about the same area where she had done first. And they were surprised. And the teenager was depressed. I got a relief from the pain. Why did she leave me? Why did she forsake me? Now the other grandmothers were only looking at this. They didn't like this idea either. But they couldn't figure out why. Why? She's a wise woman. She's a very experienced woman. She saw the results. Why? Why did she just forsake her? I don't know what Hippocrates would have said, giving up on this patient, your patient. You are abandoning your patient. Okay. In our society, there is a big focus on not abandoning the patients. Mm-hmm. That is true. But they don't bother to find out why our people are dying in such large numbers who are on dialysis of COVID-19. And why do our asthmatic dying of COVID-19? And why is COVID-19 taking the lives of all those people who are overweight or who have diabetes? So they are not interested in this. But this lady, she was brought up, you asked me the question, that ancestors, what moved them? Who were they? Where did they come from?
These were people who honored the land, honored the water.
Yes.
And honored, the spirit and all that other stuff. And
that's right.
So it was very, very deep ingrained into the culture there.
That's right. So now, obviously, this is an image that I saw, which I described in this book and in other places. So then when she came back and everybody was happy, she had some new concoction in her hand. And she was willing to give it to the teenager in pain. And at that time, the older ladies became very puzzled. What's happening here? It was working. Why did she leave her patient and go back again? Now, my imagination alone can answer this question, what happened? Because I wasn't there. I couldn't interview them. But my imagination is free. You see, to interview them, I am free. Now, at MNN, sitting with my friend Mark, I'm free. And I can see her. So she went in there And to her horror, she found out that the remedies that she was looking for that teenager, that she had collected to crush it and prepare it, they were there, the piles were there, which she had put them together before rushing out of this to see her patients. And the horror of the image, oh my God. The stuff that I wanted to give her is here. So what did I give her? And then if I don't know what I gave her, why did she get better? She had no right to get better. I am the medicine woman. I'm the concoction person. No, this is not right, this is not fair.
Also, they're dealing with energies, you know?
Yes.
The energies of, whether it's energies of God or energies of the planet or whatever, they really believed in this stuff.
And they were very tuned in. And so I imagine, next what I'm going to tell you is what I imagine happened. That in that period of stress, she had been betrayed by her ability to choose the right materials to make the concoction. So in that period of feeling deeply betrayed by circumstances, she looked up. The sun was setting on the west. She liked that. So now she's trying to make peace with herself. She has to work out this betrayal thing. What betrayed me? Why did I get affected by it? So she was looking up because there was the sun was up there, and so there was some light there. And then it happened. Probably the single most important discovery that human species had in the field of medicine and probably in other scientific fields too. She said, oh, so the remedies that I thought were helping her, they were not the right remedies. But I'm looking up there. And maybe she got better, not because of those remedies, but because of whatever comes from above and feeds these plants. So they have berries and they have trunks. So came the initial discovery that there is a higher power there, spiritual healing.
It was the energy.
So I think something like this must have happened, which began this idea. They were called men of medicine, were also called men of spirits at that time. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just changed the gender a little bit, okay, to personalize it. How many other discoveries or ideas occurred, developed like this? We understood the significance of what we had observed after we had seen it work. Not because we were a master designer and architect and we did this and this has to be this, this and this. Our ancestors were not in the servitude of the testers or the approvals or the registering people. No.
Mm-hmm.
They had listened to the inner voices. So when the teenager started getting into a lot of pain from the cramps, they figured, and then they saw some red stuff coming in her pelvic region. And so they said, it's that time. So it's very easy to see that under those circumstances, now in this case, suppose there were 100 people, Mark. Suppose like MNN, there were 100 studios. Suppose when it happened back in February of 2020, suppose at that time we started thinking, some of us, ginger tea is very good. And if you throw a little bit of lemon, that actually becomes better. Or if you put a pinch of salt, then even it gets better. Or the neem tree.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the oils, olive oil. Mm-hmm. These days I'm spending a lot of energy on testing supplemental. And so, rather than call them supplemental oils, I decided to dig out an old term and revive it, and that term is lipids, Lipids. So the lipid was the term, the word that I was introduced to for yellow, pale yellow-white or yellow-brown or sometimes yellow-red tissue that we saw in autopsy hall when we incised the belly of the carcass that we were dealing with. No, there's something for another program. But there is a sheet of that lipid material which covers the stomach and the esophagus and the duodenum. Why? Because if there is a penetrating injury, the nature had to have a system to wall this thing off, so all the intestinal contents don't spill into peritoneal cavity and bring in a roaring acute peritonitis and death. Okay, so that's still, unless the patient is lucky and is rushed to the hospital and the surgical team is all ready to go and incise it, wash up all the fecal matter on the intestine, wash out all the residue, then put lots of antibiotics. That's the only way these people survive. But nature, how did nature figure it out? Let's put a pad of fat. So pad of fat is at that time the remedy which saves the life of the patient. So if I'm using the word fat always in a negative way, he's fat, he's this, he's that, he's fat, please go to this, etc. Lipolysis means breakdown of fat for metabolism, and lipodystrophies are names of conditions where abnormal fat accumulates in unexpected areas, and they even make form some tumor sometimes. It's called Ducray's syndrome. Yeah. But in our context, it makes perfect sense to me. I want to offer your viewers one other image, recent image. That image is that in a third grade class, they invite me to go and spend some time. So I thank them and I go there. I said, hey guys, girls, can I show off your hand? Which one of you went on a boating trip with his father? You had some picnic food, the sun was nice, breeze was nice. Of course you were with your father, and he was rowing the boat. So that was nice, right? And the waters of that lake were very even. So the boat would sometimes swing a little bit, but that was like a pleasant effect. And then I say to the class, 2 weeks ago we had a very bad storm in New York, drenching rain, and then there was a small clip on television that I saw. It was like in a subway, they were all like water tanks. And then one valve opened and there was a wall of water which came down. And that day, New York City lost 7 people to that, So I say to the third graders, did you let me have a show of hands. Which one of you guys just happened to be in front of the television and you saw this wall of water coming in and it crashed, subdued everything in its way. So there were 3 or 4 small hands. Okay, So you guys were in the boat with your dads and the picnic lunch, which would have been good. But you probably could see the fish in the clear waters of the well and this. And the sun was shining on the fish. So that would have been a very nice view and the images of reflection. So you saw that, and that must have been very good. And the other guys, you saw the wall of water. You saw the surface like ice of lake, and you guys saw, oh my God, tornado itself, the whole thing, that tsunami-like thing. So I said, can I have a show of hand again? I asked the teacher, may I have a few more minutes? I want to have another show of hands in this class. So she says, okay. So I said, can I have a show of hands? Which one of you would like to put the two things together?
Because they existed.
They existed.
They existed at that. So we always are thinking about the negative aspect when we're in a trauma state, but those good things also existed and they're never emphasized.
Right.
So that's very interesting.
Right. Now, so some of those little hands came up. I said, okay, so you are Susie? She said, yeah. Susie, tell me, I think it would be wonderful for the whole class to listen to you. And I especially would be very happy to listen to you. So how do you connect the two images? The image of being on a surface of a lake, calm waters, and some fish swimming around, and knowledge that I have very good lunch, picnic lunch my dad has for me. My mom will come to later on. So, can you put them together? She said, yes. One is very bad and it can do bad things, and one was very good. I said, oh. And the difference was what? The difference you saw was the boat on the lake surface was in a wave pattern, like this here. And in the subway, that was the pattern of a storm. So that would be very unsettling, very frightening. And so, can you see the difference? That one person, one of you eats food every day, lunch, here in the school. But it creates a wave-like pattern of energy generation under your skin. And then there's another group, and they are eating some French fries or some food like that from other place. And to create the effect, metabolic effect, energy effect under the skin is the same as the wall of water. So now, thank you, you connected it very well. The one is very, very, experience is very positive, and the other is very frightening. So suppose our ancestors prepared their food and grew their food, so it would always create a wave-like pattern of going up and down and producing energy and all its effect. And suppose in the other town, they grew their food and they cooked it in such a way that it created the pattern of a wall of water coming in. Well, that's what used to happen. Our ancestors, they observed things. They processed their food right, they grew their food right, and they saw how the food was growing. They also knew what the effect was. And when somebody was going through this wave pattern of eating and feeling good and then moving around, that was very good. And then you saw another group of children who were in the pattern of a wall of water. They were trembling. They were afraid, looking at their faces. So don't you think that, we should stay on this side rather than go on that side?
Yeah.
Can I have a show of hands of people who would say, yes, it would be better to be on this and better than this? See, when you eat candy all the time and there's more sugar there and there is Coke there, etc., and there is ice cream everywhere, that creates you the wall of water pattern. And when you have a little bit of salad, and then you can put some cherries there, that is like picnic on the tree. Now, can I have a show of hands of people who would rather be on the beach, on the lake, with the picnic lunch with your dads, and those people, show of hands, who would rather be in their image in the subway, where there's so much water collected that it's a wall. But that's what we did, Mark.
Right.
Our ancestors were observing people. They grew their food. They prepared it themselves. They saw the effect that the food has. Then along came the commercial business of America.
And destroyed the ancestral pathways to life.
That's right.
I had a question. We are running a little short on time, but let's see. How did, or could COVID, if it hasn't already, but could it interfere with the reproductive systems and health of women?
Oh, I think that it is going to frighten the people, men and women. Some men, when they are frightened, they are sexually aroused, so to speak.
Right.
And the women would be more unpredictable. But you are pulling them out of their norm. And so a 15-year-old girl gets married and she's a child bride. And now she's vulnerable. And then when she has a baby now, the vulnerability increases. So I think that there it is very easy to see that COVID-19 will disrupt the society, and in disruption of the society, there will be a higher incidence of child brides and higher incidence of babies born that way. And at that time, the mothers and the fathers and the usual support structure, that would be reduced. And at that time, that stress will reduce the immunity. And that reduction of immunity energizes the virus. I think we cannot separate. The mortality, the pregnancy now, there's a lot of, information that COVID-19 very seriously compromises the unborn baby. Poor circulation.
That's crazy.
Poor oxygen.
Wow.
They have pneumonia.
Right.
They have circulatory collapse.
Right.
And they know that they're sick, and everybody is telling them they are sick, and they talk about the percentage of death, and the ventilator is not available, or this and that, etc. I think the panic that is created by some people, what is the difference between these panic creators and our ancestors? The ancestors are authentic because they experience certain things, they observed that, they saw the consequences of that, and they wet their hands. Our industrial counterparts did nothing like that. They were just interested, where did the paper come from, which country is it, Israel, is it New Zealand, so they came up. And they fed the frenzy, the panic.
We're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the subject of living well with COVID-19, it was very educational. There's just so many more questions, and we just have to continue this next time.
Okay, that'll be good.
Yeah. Dr. Majid Ali, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.